This video is brought to you by Sync My Music. Hi everyone, so in the last video we were talking about template preparation. So when you receive a brief from a music library, you construct a template and you do this because otherwise you would have to build your Cubase session always from the ground up, and having a template just saves you an incredible amount of time. So in this video we are going to talk about some composing tricks when I'm composing. So we have our brief from our clients from the music library. They say what they want, we create a template, and then the composing process will start. So this is the Cubase session from one of the tracks that I composed for the library. And when I composed this track, I had in mind that we were recording with a real string ensemble. So before I dive deeper into composing techniques for strings, I'm going to show you quickly what we already have. So we have some drums, we have some synthesizers. I recorded a real Juno 60 for this piece of music. We have a piano, we have the strings, and then we also have some brass, two solo horns that are playing in the climax of the track. So a little side note for this video, I have no real background in music theory. I didn't go to music school. I only have a basic understanding of chords and music theory, so I'm not going into full detail on how to arrange and compose and how to make different chord progressions, because simply I would like to tell you this, but I simply don't know the namings of the chords and of the progression. So if you are looking for something like that, I think you can better watch some videos from Rick Beato, who is going into full detail in music theory. So I highly recommend you to check out his channel if you want to know more about music theory. So without further ado, let's get started. So for the sake of this video, we are going to focus on the climax of this track, and I'm going to solo all the individual instruments, and then we're going to build upon layer until we get the finished track. When I start composing a track like this, I always start, or most of the time, I start with the piano. I do this because with the piano you can get an excellent framework regarding bass notes, chords, and also melodies. And a lot of composers use this method, like for example, John Williams is still composing the old-fashioned way. He doesn't use a DW or a computer to create his work. He still uses a piano, and then he is sketching out on paper all the different instruments like violins, brass, etc. So I'm also starting to work with the piano, and then I'm using different layers and different instrument sections to make the track sound big and grand without going into the epic region or the epic genre of this kind of music. So the piano line goes something like this. So basically it's just bass notes and a simple chord semi-melody line that I'm playing in this part of the track. So regarding the plugin that I'm using for the piano, it is, let's see, the Glass Piano from Spitfire Labs. It's a very nice plugin I'm using right now for this kind of purposes. And I'm also using as an effect on the piano let's see, what kind of plugin am I using for the effects? It's the Valhalla Shimmer Reverb that I'm also using. So the Glass Piano from Spitfire Labs is totally free. You can download it. I give you a link in the description of this video. The Valhalla Shimmer Reverb, however, is a paid version. So the piano itself sounds like this. And with the reverb, it sounds like this. So as a quick side note, I'm not using this plugin in the final version of this track because I have recorded a real piano at my local music school with the Yamaha upright piano, and that's in the end has been used in this track. And in the next video, I'll show you how to mix a real piano like that. So once we have the piano, we are going to, let's see, the synthesizers. So I'm using a combination between a virtual synthesizer and a real synthesizer. The real synthesizer is a Juno 60, and the fake synthesizer is the, let's see, the Mosaic bass from Heaviosity, and I'm using the analog undertones as a sort of a sub bass to really emphasize the subby bass for this track. So the first part of the synthesizers is a normal synth pad. I think it was the Strings 2 preset with the Juno chorus on it, and it sounds in combination with the piano absolutely incredible. It's sounding like this. So I'm playing a little bit with the cutoff of this synthesizer, and I'm also using the Valhalla reverb on this track of this of this part of the synthesizers. So it's the same Valhalla reverb. I absolutely love this reverb. So beside the pad, I'm also using the Juno bass. It's basically the same preset, the same Strings 2 preset from the Juno 60. So I'm recording the same bass line as I do with the virtual synthesizer. And basically you get this sound. Let's eliminate that one for now. So when I combine this with the sub bass, you will notice a significant oomph in the sub bass region. And now with the pad. I mean, that's basically already a track on its own, let alone if we would add these strings later on in this video. So as for effects on these bass tracks, I'm using, let's see, on the Juno bass, I'm using, again, the Valhalla reverb. I'm just cranking the reverb on this track. I actually think it sounds really lush when you're also applying some reverb to the bass. And then for the sub bass, for the virtual bass, I wanted a more drier sound so that it really pierced through the Juno. And for that, what I did in the equalizer settings, I made a bit of a dip in the lower frequencies. So I made a cutoff of around 50 around 50 kilohertz, and I made some corrections in the equalizer. And besides that, I'm adding a distortion plugin as well. I'm using the driver plugin from Native Instruments to make it a bit edgy sounding. So without let's solo this one. So without plugins or without any effects, it sounds like this. With effects together. So besides the synthesizers and the piano, I have some percussion only on the climax of this. Oh no, it's also on the midsection of this track. But it's basically a simple transition to go from one part of the track to the climax of the track. So I'm going to show you really quickly. As you can see, it's nothing really major. It's just a transition to go from the midsection to the climax. So before we go to the strings, I also have some small brass parts that are only in the climax of this track to add something more, to have a little bit of a hint of epicness in this track without going too epic. So it's just a basic solo horn. It's two solo horns that are both in, let's see, I thought it was in octaves. Can I start this real quick? Yes, I can. So yeah, it's basically a two-part doubled and in octaves. So let me see how this sounds. So it's the lower brass section. I think it actually the lower brass is an ensemble patch. I don't know why I call it solo horns. Yeah, it's the monster low articulation of this library. So it's basically a melody line and the bass of the brass section. And as for effects, we used again the Valhalla reverb on the melody line, and we don't use any reverb except for an equalizer with some corrective EQ. But the bass sound of the brass is basically the dry sound to make it stand out more in the entire track. All right, and now the most complicated programming of this entire track, the strings. So for the strings, I'm going to solo it all. I'm going to solo the strings because then you have a good understanding of what is happening. So for the strings, I'm using a solo violin. So they call this also the leader of the ensemble of the first violins. Then we go into the first violins. I use violins 1, violin 2, violas, cello, bass. And I'm also using, in the beginning of this track, the Hans Zimmer string section. But that's just to layer it with the real strings when those have been recorded. So like I said before, I'm not going into full detail regarding the notes or the key changes that I'm using or into anything related to music theory, but I'm going to show you what I did. So I started out with the solo violins compared with the piano. So I'm playing the piano and then I'm playing the solo violin on top to have a good idea of the notes that I'm pressing, that everything is corresponding correctly. So it sounds a little bit like this. So I'm using a lot of reverb on this solo violin as well because I wanted to have it an eerie sound through the entire track. So I'm not doing a lot regarding notes. It's just switching between the notes. It's not a melody line. It's just accentuates some areas of the track. And then we are going to the first violins, and I always have the piano rolling in the back when I'm composing with the violins. So we had the first violins, then we go to we had the leader, the solo violin, and then we go to the first violins, and it sounds like this. Oh, I need to press it. So the first violins are actually the melody line of the string ensemble, and then the second violins are also doing the same thing. I think even, yeah, they're in octaves. So the first violins playing in the upper region of the violins, and then the second violins are an octave lower, and then together it sounds like this. And then I create a sub bass line or a semi bass line with the cello and the violas. And the same thing as with the violins, the violas are an octave up compared to the cello, and it looks a little bit like this in the piano roll. Come on, work with me. So it looks like this. So the lowers are the cello, on top is the viola or the alt violin, and it sounds together like this. And then I'm using the bass, the contrabass And that's basically playing the same thing as the sub bass and the Juno bass combined. So it sounds together like this. And when you leave the piano out of it, you get this. So it's funny because I'm actually layering everything, and all the individual sections like strings, synthesizers, the piano, everything can be its own song basically, or its own track. And this is why production music libraries ask for the stems, because they have so much more flexibility to implement it into television shows or in dramas, in film. So it's very, very versatile. And obviously all this separate tracks or sections can be combined into one track, and then you get this. So this is how I compose my music. I start with the piano, then I add some layers regarding synths, strings, brass, basically anything that I think can be of a benefit to the entire track. And then normally I would start right away with mixing in my mixing view, and everything is going to the subgroups like I mentioned in my previous video. But for now, because we were recording with real strings, I had to transcribe the MIDI data, and the MIDI data, the MIDI data is basically what the strings combined look like. So like this is the MIDI data. It's basically the information that I'm pressing on my keyboard in Cubase. And when I'm exporting this data to my arranger, he is putting it on sheet music. So in the next video, I'll be talking about when you receive the sheet music from the arranger, how to implement this into Pro Tools, because the recording studios where you record your real instruments with, or the strings with, are basically all using Pro Tools. And it is not as simple as dragging your stems into Pro Tools and then they can start playing, because you need to make sure that the bars and beats, like you see on top of here, this is the bars and beats of my track. You need to make sure that they correspond correctly with the bars that you have on your sheet music, and it also needs to correspond with the bars in your basically in your DW in Pro Tools. So that's a little bit of a trick that I'm going to show you in the next video. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments, and I'll try to answer them as best as I can and as fast as I can. So thank you for watching this video. If you have any questions, let me know, and I see you in the next one.